Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show, bringing you another really fascinating guest today involved in creating a better tomorrow for all of us. Today we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Annie Kritcher, who is a nuclear engineer and physicist, works at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and is the design lead of their hybrid E-capsule technology within their inertial confinement fusion program, and is a member of the inertial confinement fusion leadership team, and recently led the shot to N210808. A lot of us heard about the one in the news at their National Ignition Facility, heralding this really a seminal moment and significant step towards fusion break-even target. Dr. Kritcher was first employed at Lawrence Livermore actually back in 2004 as a summer intern, as a Lawrence Livermore Lawrence Scholar during her time when she was at UC Berkeley. There she earned her master's degree and ultimately her doctorate in nuclear engineering. And then she did postdoc work at Lawrence Livermore following the completion of her Ph.D. And during her postdoc appointment, she continued to work on a theme of X-ray Thomson scattering, which we'll be getting into, investigating nuclear plasma interactions, and co-leading a campaign to measure the equation state of materials to hundreds of millibar. That article is featured in Nature. In 2012, Dr. Kritcher became a member of the scientific staff and now serves as team lead for the integrated implosion modeling and as a group leader within the design physics division at Lawrence Livermore. And just as a little background, Lawrence Livermore National Lab is a federally funded R&D center located in Livermore, California. It was originally established back in 1952, now sponsored by the United States Department of Energy, and it has a wide-ranging responsibility, including ensuring the safety, security, and reliability of our country's nuclear weapon stock, as well as advancing science, engineering, and technology in a wide range of areas, bolstering homeland security and other national research areas of importance. We're honored to have with us today Dr. Annie Kritcher. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Good morning, Ira. Thank you for having me.
It's really great having you. I would love to start things off because I was noticing, before you got involved in this amazing area of fusion research that we read about you in the press a lot lately. You actually started off at the University of Michigan in the health physics laboratory. I was wondering if you could take us back a little bit and talk about the beginning of all this and sort of when the first sort of radiological nuclear bug bit you and you took off on this amazing journey you're on now.
Yeah, so I actually set out to go to Michigan for mechanical engineering, then visited the campus and saw there's this cool thing called nuclear engineering. And it was a really small department, and they had a lot of different focus areas. We had fusion, we had radioactive waste management, we have, of course, fission, and we have health physics and all these different areas. And so it just seems like something really cool and different to try. So when I first started out there, I started in the health physics area, which of course is studying the impact of radiation on the human body. And so I spent the first few years of my life there walking around with a Geiger counter around campus looking for sources of radiation and such like that. And then I came to Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, of course, because when you live in Michigan, you want to go to California. That's just a given. And they're doing so much amazing work out here. And it was actually a thing at the time. Everybody was sort of wanting to come out to Lawrence Livermore Lab for an internship. And had great experiences out here. So I came out and worked in the nuclear physics area, where I did sort of calibration of measurements of nuclear transition measurements. And I thought that was really cool. But then, so when you come out here to Livermore Lab for the summer, they encourage you to sort of look around at everything that's being done at the laboratory. And so when that was, back in 2004, before experiments on the NIF had happened. And so, just going to these talks about what's going on out here with lasers and fusion really sparked my interest. So it was that first summer in 2004, and I basically said, next time I come out, I'm coming out and working on something related to that. So then going back to U of M, I sort of did rad health for a little bit too, but then transitioned more to fusion type research.
Outstanding. And yeah, so it's fascinating. You go through this critical skills internship program. You're working on your PhD as well, and then you publish ultra fast K alpha Thomson scattering from shock compressed matter for use in dense matter diagnostic. PhD title. You're working and I'm simplifying this a bit on this concept of Thomson scattering, basically scattering of photons by free electrons in an ionized gas, kind of similar to what's going on in a little fusion reaction up there in the sky that we see every day if it's not cloudy. Talk a little bit about, because it's fascinating. You talk about fusion dynamics in your PhD. You talk about Jupiter at one point, and that little failed star that we have in our solar system. And then you also been publishing alongside that, just continuing to study the stars. In this one case, the study of carbon envelopes of white dwarfs. Talk about where we are in terms of fusion, in terms of understanding, what else we have to learn from the stars that inform sort of our fusion understanding, and a little bit of what you're learning that informs people that are studying stars about everything that's going on up there.
Yeah, and great question. And I could probably talk about this for a really long time.
Take your time.
So starting out, kind of doing, when you start out and do research as a graduate student and as a postdoc, you don't just jump right into designing, ignition experiments on the NIF.
Right.
And so jumping in and understanding these, what we call high energy density plasmas, is how I started out. And actually in the experimental world, I started out and then transitioned to the design computational theory type area. And so when I started out doing experiments, the experiments I did, the Thomson scattering and the white dwarf envelope measurements, related to the material properties of the types of systems we care about. So the fusion ignition system goes through many different states of matter as it comes in and implodes. It starts out at ambient and then gets to conditions that are more extreme than the center of the sun. And so as it's coming in and transitioning all these states of matter, they're all important for being able to provide a good predictive capability to be able to design these experiments. And so in my previous work, I spent some time, and it's really interesting too, studying the different parameter space plasma properties themselves. So these, like you said, the plasma is a ionized gas in the simplest form. High energy density plasmas are when you have something that's really hot, but also really dense. And so you still have a plasma and still ionized, but it's also extreme density. And when you have those types of conditions, predicting and calculating the ionization state can be very, very difficult. So you have these partially degenerate plasmas where the orbitals are being squeezed by the extreme pressure of the dense plasma. And so it's not just simple theory to be able to model these things. And so I started out doing experiments to both understand what's going on in the universe, and in the universe we have the same, we experience the same types of conditions we're trying to create in the laboratory. So studying those material properties directly feeds into the way that we calculate and design these experiments.
Excellent. And before we get into, because I really want to sort of delve into the different parts of this amazing experiment in terms of the inertial uh, the inertial ignition fusion work that you've been up to, but take us into the National Ignition Facility for a moment, because obviously it has a lot in its mission when you go to the website, and obviously a main part of this is you and fusion ignition, high energy gain, and so forth. It does other things, though, in terms of, I mentioned in the bio, sort of the nuclear stockpile, studying kind of exotic material science, which I won't even try to explain. But give us a little history on the facility itself, because it is one of those sort of mega facilities, where they put a lot of money into, a lot of energy, a lot of really advanced science happening.
The facility supports a variety of missions. We have basic science research, a laboratory astrophysics. We have the inertial confinement fusion experiments. We study a wide range of plasma physics there. And in addition, it supports our stockpile stewardship program. In the absence of nuclear testing, it enables us to test our predictive capability and gain training of new designers and new experimentalists in this high energy density area, which we otherwise wouldn't have in a practical sense, real life training. And so it supports these three areas in a variety of ways. We have high energy density science that directly supports the stockpile through these types of measurements that I talked about, material property measurements, et cetera, and testing our predictive capability. And of course, there's the inertial fusion ignition experiments that I can talk a little bit more about in detail next. And there's things like accessing, warm dense matter. We can access the conditions of the center of stars and the sun. There's just a lot of really cool examples of things that we're doing at the NIF. We're studying, solar winds and lots of different types of cool science together with the fusion energy science and supporting the stockpile.
Outstanding. Yeah, let's take some time to dive into inertial confinement fusion research, and I really, I've really carved it out here because I think it'd be really interesting to talk about sort of the three major pieces that at least I see as a layman, in terms of lasers, in terms of the fuel, and then ultimately the package that fuel is maintained in. I think lasers would be cool to start with, just because we've talked about lasers a bit on some previous shows where we've interviewed some other folks from our defense department talking about directed energy technology. In those cases, the lasers are a little smaller in the kilojoule range. You're dealing with very powerful lasers in the millions range that and you got a lot of them. I think something close to 200. Talk a little bit about the
sure. Yeah. I can walk through the experimental setup. So the NIF
Please.
is a facility that's the size of 3 football fields.
Got it.
And this facility houses 192 laser beams.
Okay.
Altogether, those laser beams deliver 2 million joules of energy on target, so 2 megajoules, and with powers up to 500 terawatts. Okay. So it also very high powers. We direct all of the laser energy into the center of about a 10-meter diameter target chamber. And then sitting inside of that target chamber is about a 1 centimeter long hollow can. And that's what we call our hull ROM. So it's about the size of a pencil eraser. And then inside of that can is where we shine the laser beams, and that creates a plasma inside of the can, and also a very hot radiation bath or radiation temperature, radiation black body temperature. And then what that does is that heats up the outside of a capsule, of a hollow capsule that sits in the center of this hull ROM. And that causes the capsule material to, in this case, it's diamond, to explode outward. That capsule holds the fusion fuel, the deuterium tritium fuel. It's about the size of a BB. And when the outside explodes outward, that it's the rocket effect. That outward expansion sends the fuel and also a little bit of the diamond inward, imploding spherically. So we're squeezing it down to a very, very small volume at extreme velocities. And what that does is it heats and compresses a small fraction of the initial fuel, of the initial DT. And if you can ignite that small fraction of initial fuel, then it can you can have the self-heating from the fusion itself take over, and then that burns up the rest of the fuel in the target. That's the idea.
Got it. Got it. And you mentioned the you had talked about the capsule that holds the fuel, and we get to the fuel in a minute. But you mentioned this term, and I studied it a little bit before the show. Actually, this whole realm, and sort of when you're first describing it, I've listened to other presentations that you've given on the news and so forth. And they're just saying, okay, you got a BB inside a P and a little can, but this whole realm concept, I mean, there's very complex geometry in this thing. This is not, it's just as a can with a P in it. You really, in order for these lasers, when they come in with their extreme energy, they have to bounce and do the right thing here. Talk a little bit about, because you mentioned diamonds, and then one of the terms I've heard you use in other presentations, extreme design optimization and finesse that goes into designing the whole ROM. Take us into that world, because I think that's why at one part I don't want to overlook that, because I think it's very sophisticated. Take us into this.
Yeah, great point. So what we're trying to do here is compress something that's about the size of a basketball down to the size of a pea. So that's sort of the amount of compression that we need to do. And we have to do that so in such a spherical way to the percent level that if we don't do that, we can't couple the energy that we're trying to give to this hot plasma to ignite. We can't couple the energy in. And so if you're a little bit squashed or a little bit out of round, you can't efficiently couple the energy. So the challenge here is that when you blast the inside of this can with the laser beams, that creates a very non-uniform plasma expansion. And that plasma expands and implodes inward in the direction where you're actually trying to get the laser beam still into the target. So the target, we don't just blast it with all the laser energy all at once.
Right.
We have a very defined set of powers on each of the beams.
Got it.
And that it has a time history to it. And as the plasma is filling into the Hall-ROM, it's very difficult to get the laser in at the end of the pulse when you need to get it in and exactly how you need to get it. So what we need to do is create a very uniform radiation bath. And doing that when you have plasma coming in at different levels into the Hall-ROM and lasers trying to propagate through that plasma and get to where you want them to go, that is one of our biggest challenges and requires this extreme design optimization. We're trying to do what's best for the implosion together with what's best for the Hall-ROM, and those things are usually inconsistent with each other, and so it ends up being a very delicate balance of we know we want to do this to make the plasma, but that's really hard for the Hall-ROM to do. So the idea here, the thing that the biggest challenge is we need to get enough energy density coupled to this initial hot spark of plasma to get it to ignite so that it can take over and do the work for us. And it's a race against time because we're competing with all of these losses in the system. The plasma just wants to cool itself down. And so we're trying to do this as efficiently as we can and hold the implosion together long enough to make this happen. And so all those considerations have different implications for how you design the capsule, the way you design the fuel that sits inside. So we actually have an ice layer of fuel just inside of the capsule and then a DT gas core. And so all of the different parameters can be optimized: the thickness of the ice layer, the thickness of the capsule material, the laser pulse shaping, everything to try to get to these right conditions that are good for the Hall-ROM and the capsule together.
Excellent. And then, that leads right into the, discussion about fuels, because, you're mentioning DT, deuterium, and tritium, which are sort of the standard in these experiments. Just say a few words, because in terms of the periodic table, okay, they sit up there somewhere between hydrogen and helium, very exotic materials. Can you say a few words about sort of, because you need such small amounts, like where do you source deuterium and tritium from, where you store it, and a little bit about, I know, just from my Wikipedia searches, there's some other theoretical areas like helium-3, something called a protium boron reaction, other types of fuels that are also being sort of proposed in some of these different types of experiments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on just sort of optimization of the fuels for these types of experiments.
So, excuse me, deuterium tritium has the most favorable reaction cross-section.
Okay.
So, I mean, one of the biggest challenges for fusion is to get it to the right material conditions so that the D and the T can fuse together. And that requires extreme temperatures because unlike fission, where you just feed it a neutron and it splits apart,
Right.
For fusion, you have to get them close enough to get the deuterium and tritium close enough together to overcome the Coulomb barrier. And that requires extreme conditions. And when the reaction rate or cross section is more difficult, or you need higher temperatures, or it doesn't happen at as high of a rate, then this just makes the problem more difficult. So the most favorable cross section is deuterium tritium, producing the helium and the neutron. There are many other fusion reactions that could be considered. You mentioned helium-3, and that's kind of interesting because there's been talk about sourcing the moon for helium-3.
Yep.
So that's kind of fun, but it would be harder in a design space to make that work. As far as deuterium, it's readily available. It can be found in heavy water or seawater. Tritium is more difficult because there's a limited supply on Earth, and a lot of our supply comes from previous underground testing or from reactors fission reactors where you use the neutrons from that to interact with lithium and create tritium. And so the current concept for an operating fusion plant would be to breed the tritium in situ as you go along, and in doing that with a lithium blanket using the neutrons from the fusion reaction, so that you don't have to have the idea is not to have a bunch of tritium sitting around that you need to gather, and which is very difficult to do given the fact that it's hard to obtain. It's that you would breed it in situ.
Got it. Perfect. So you've talked about, as we discussed, the inertial confinement dynamics, you talk about incredible heat and amazing pressures that you're working with there at the facility. We've profiled some of the folks from the European Euro Fusion Initiative, and they've gone all in on magnetic confinement technologies in tokamak, and we've discussed some of that on those shows. Say a few words about. I'm trying to just wrap my head around something in terms of, in their case, got these magnets that try to keep once the fusion, the plasma is there, it keeps everything kind of in order or whatever. I describe this right way.
Yeah.
What's, once all this heat and pressure is generated in the NIF, what are some of the tools that that are, I guess, similar to the magnetic component of this? What's the equivalent to that? Walk us through that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in a tokamak type situation, taking a step back, the key here is to generate to reach certain temperature, density, confinement time conditions.
Okay.
So it's a triple product, and the magnetic community operates in a different area of parameter space where they need to run for longer times. They need to confine the plasma for much longer durations, but they operate at a much lower density and also much higher temperature. And so the key there is to confine the plasma for long enough times, and that's why they use the magnets to confine the plasma. What we're doing at the NIF is called inertial confinement. So you confine the plasma with its own inertia. And the idea is to reach extreme densities and also hot temperatures, not as hot as a tokamak, but the confinement times are much shorter and they would come in bursts of power. And so the power that you generate out is much, much higher than in a tokamak, but for a very short period of time. And so you're not trying to continuously confine this plasma to get more and more fusion out. The scheme is that you would field these targets at a pulse rate or a repetition rate, where the idea is that you have one target, a certain amount of fuel in that target, and in one shot, you're trying to burn up as much fuel as you can before the thing explodes back out. So you have the thing imploding, its own inertia is confining it for a certain amount of time. You want to confine it for a long enough amount of time to try to burn up as much of the fuel that's in the capsule as you can, and then move on to the next target. So it would be pulsed.
Got it. Got it. Excellent. So, Annie, on December 5th of 2022, your name became a household term, and you had the break even, or the greater than break even experiment. Aside from sort of having 1,000 interviews and being all over the press, what happened on December 6th? Is it, once you achieve this, greater than the input in terms of the laser power, what happens next? I mean, I envisioned you to come back in the next day and just, how long do you have to do the next experiment? What's next on sort of the chart for 2023? I just love to, because it doesn't stop here.
Yeah, great question. So remind me if I think that was like a 3-part question there. So the day after the experiment, actually, you come in, to be honest, I came into the lab and I had a chat with, so we actually fielded a diagnostic that supports the stockpile stewardship program as a ride-along experiment. And I spoke with the person that was doing that experiment. He's also a nuclear engineer, and he was looking at the diagnostic data of the yield, the neutron yield. And he uncovered a detector that one of the detectors was actually showing really low yield, and it was inconsistent with the other detectors, which they later on figured out the reason for that, and it wasn't due to the low yield. But at first, you come in and you need to verify that all the diagnostics are consistent. Sure. So like the next day we're excited, but we're trying to tamp our excitement because there's this one detector that shows a lower yield, and we need to figure out why that was specifically. And it was a explainable detector issue, but so it was kind of like this, okay, well, let's dig in a bit, let's wait a little bit, let's look at all the data and all the other diagnostics as well. We're pointing to the high yield. So it's you come in and you analyze the data and you make sure, and that actually went on for several days. And then, part of it is that we're counting neutrons still from our detectors as time goes on. And then at the same time, we're starting the post-shot simulations. So we have our pre-shot design calculations, and then after the shot, we take the delivered laser pulse and the delivered target, all of that information, and put it in a post-shot simulation. So starting that up and trying to look in the simulation, see if that's consistent with what we're seeing in the experiment, and just trying to dot all of our I's and cross all of our T's. And, so it's like right after a shot, people are more motivated to come in and work faster. So all of the teams were just immediately, some people working all hours of the night to try to analyze this data. So that was really exciting. And then in terms of how fast we can do these shots at the moment, we just started doing these higher laser energy shots and higher neutron yield shots. And there's a certain amount of time that the facility needs in between these shots to make sure that we haven't damaged the laser or we aren't inducing damage in the laser. And so at this point in time, we're looking at maybe 10 of these a year, 10 of these types of shots a year next year. This year, we had planned to do one in February, but we had a target failure. And so the next sort of experiment for a repeat would be in end of April. However, we're continuing to do experiments to just study the plasma physics and trying to improve other aspects of the implosion at the same time at lower laser energy.
Okay.
And that includes trying to increase the compression of the fuel. So if you can compress the fuel a little bit better and squeeze it a little bit better, you can hold the implosion together a little bit longer and burn up more of the fuel. We're looking at ways to couple more of that Hallram energy to the capsule. We're doing all this stuff at the same time, and we have multiple different campaigns. And so there's still quite a bit of work that goes on as we're doing these less frequent high yield shots, high energy, high yield shots.
Outstanding, really outstanding. Annie, what in terms of we talked about at the beginning of the show, sort of, your entry into all this back in 2004 and this unique internship. Any similar programs like that going on now in 2023? Are you involved in any mentoring of sort of the next generation that sees you? And, I want to be like Annie Kritcher too, and follow in your footsteps here. Any other interesting programs happening at Lawrence Livermore to really encourage that next generation that's interested in physics to, go down this path?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have programs that range from, people involved in going to grade schools, even all the way up
Nice.
through, grad school level. So we've been spending a lot of time giving talks at universities and trying to encourage students to go to the graduate school programs there and collaborate with us out here. We have a variety of summer internship programs across the entire laboratory. That's always been the case. We have several different flavors of internship programs. We also have the postdoctoral fellowship. We have a high energy density fellowship program for postdocs, and we have programs to support people during their thesis research at the laboratory. And I've been involved in a lot of outreach to the universities to try to get people interested in joining the field and collaborating with us at the laboratory. And I'm also involved in mentorship of our new hires here. And but the span that we want to touch on now, we want to increase our range of influence over the new generations and trying to use this result to get more people interested in coming to the laboratory.
Outstanding. And just related to that, in terms of sort of public facing stuff, I know that I read that you gave a colloquium, I think it was back at Berkeley last month. Any other conferences, presentations, stuff that you have coming up that's public facing where we potentially can meet you, listen to you? Anything else that's happening on the calendar that you could talk about, please?
Sure. Wednesday the 29th, I'm speaking to Dave Hammer's class at Cornell University.
Okay.
And that'll be another colloquium. And he's nuclear energy and electrical engineering there. And then actually the day after that, on the 30th, I'm going to be talking at the Frontiers of Plasma Physics colloquium. The American Physical Society is coming up, the Division of Plasma Physics this year. There's going to be a special session on the fusion result and ICF. I have another colloquium in the Berkeley Physics Department coming up in April.
And then just one last thing. I know before the show we were chatting a little bit. I know the Lawrence Livermore is, I guess, creating a strategic plan for the coming year. When can we expect to see something like that in the public domain? I don't know if it's going to be up on your website or in terms of the next phases of all this exciting stuff.
So we're currently in a phase where we're developing a strategic plan for an inertial fusion energy program here, or initiative at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Through that initiative, we are developing our expertise in that area, our scientific expertise. And in addition, we're collaborating with some private companies to help them and learn and also continue to develop our expertise. And we are in discussions with our NNSA sponsors about a longer term program. I don't have a date for when that information might be finalized or released.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we will keep following you and keeping track of your amazing work. I mean, it's just a wonderful journey you've been on, very inspiring, and I just really wish you the best with all of it. And I just want to say, I enjoyed the one part of the introduction of your dissertation where you thank your father, and he talks about how you talk about how he was always inspiring you to reach for the stars. Well, you clearly are not just reaching for the stars, reaching for the power behind the stars. So it's just a really, really amazing story, and I thank you for sharing it with us. Again, for everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Dr. Annie Kritcher, nuclear engineer and physicist at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories. Annie, again, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us and educate us for a little while. Thank you for everything you do. And as we like to say here on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for everybody via what you're doing. Really great story.
Thank you so much for having me.